way that 911, well, the work we've done to date is discounted or is faulty or is in need of being tossed out and restarted. That's not it at all. It's to build on the good work that's being done. So I've introduced myself. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, George, and he's going to do the same. George.
Laura, thanks a lot. I'd like to echo everything you just said, actually. I think that's all spot on. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm George Rice. I am managing partner at a company called Skyhawk Global. We're a consulting firm specializing in providing support and guidance to organizations that serve the public sector. Before that, the front end of my career, I started out as a DEA agent. And in the midst of that, working in various countries, I have seen how response actually does not work with regard to emergency calling in many countries very well. We're fortunate to have a good response system here, and it's working pretty well, I'd say. Obviously, with some tweaks that have to happen. But more recently, I have been the executive director of APCO International and of ICER, the Industry Council for Emergency Response Technologies. So I have a keen understanding of these issues. I have worked on this very issue as well, of changing the BLS designation of the telecommunicator position to professionalizing that in the eyes of the regulatory bodies that manage and sort of oversee these things. So this is near and dear to my heart as well. And transforming and transitioning 911 systems matters to me on many fronts, not the least of which is because it represents the first access to response. And that's the way I refer to it generally. There are the first responders or the field responders people always refer to, but I think of 911 as the first access to response. And that's nationwide as well. And it sits at the very front of the entire emergency response ecosystem. We have to look at how we can evolve it to be responsive to the times. As Laura said, and as Jerry said earlier, there's none of what we're doing within the context of today or what we will do throughout this project means that there is any level of scrutiny put on 911 and the professionals that manage it and perform those functions in the sense that there's something wrong. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to provide the systems with the better tools and the evolution to keep up with how society is changing. Certainly, there is no way in which a 911 professional has control over what happens in the field. That's just not the job. We all know that certainly. But the profession itself is just that. We want to look at ways to ensure that there's parity across the entire public safety system. If someone in one of the veins of public safety is referred to in a professional setting, that should be applied as well to the telecommunicator role as well. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we're here to discuss here. But Laura will give us a little bit better perspective on where we're going from here.
You know, and I'm so happy that, excuse me, that George is the co-chair of this, because with his experience with APCO International, he's probably talked to as many PSAP professionals as I have in my time. So I think George is very well suited to help co-chair this very important work group. So we're co-chairing the Public Safety Telecommunicator Professionalism and Supports work group. And what we hope to do in this very short time that we have today is just to whet your appetite on this topic and entice you to participate in the actual work group itself. This kickoff, if you will help frame the conversations to come. And we have some pretty big objectives. I was a little exhausted looking at them, but I know that it's perfectly attainable because we have collective wisdom, passion, and energies. And if there's one thing that 911 professionals bring to the table, it is passion and energies. And I speak from that as the director voice in me. So our objectives include what investments are needed to support comprehensive PST, Public Safety Telecommunicator, skill set requirements, standards, training, and certification. And again, the 911 professional needs to speak to that topic. What occupational support is needed? And that includes all aspects of wellness, physical, emotional, and mental. We'll talk about the opportunities for advancement, pay, and benefit equity. This is a meaningful and rewarding career field. It's highly technical. It's getting more technical with the advancements of Next Gen 911. And the recognition both in our compensation and in our support needs to reflect that. And then, of course, occupational reclassification title change to elevate the telecommunicators' influence in the public safety hierarchy. We need our classification changed from clerical secretarial to the more appropriate public safety umbrella. And then alignment of job descriptions with actual duties being done by our PST professionals. So that's a lot, and I hope that you will join us in this effort. And as I mentioned in my intro, I'm really eager to bring more awareness to this field of public service. To many people, 911 is not seen as its own unique profession. It's been said by many earlier today. It is blurred together with the uniform that shows up at the door. And people will even say that to the public, oh, I had a fire and 911 showed up. Oh, the fire department showed up. But they don't think about the men and the women sitting in front of 6 or more computers, wearing a headset, hearing what they have to hear, hearing that the crisis, and then they have to stay calm and focused to try to bring some order to that chaos. And that takes a toll on people. So we're going to have a couple of questions as the other work groups have done. And I believe we will have in the chat, Matthew or someone will put in our word cloud link. And George is going to walk us through a couple of questions. There's the link to get us started. So I will turn it over to George.
Thanks again, Laura. Appreciate it. I'm presuming we'll have the Mentimeter up here momentarily. But let me read off a question to you here. In fact, let's read this here. When you think about telecommunicator professionalism, what would be your recommendations regarding development of nationwide recognized training parameters? And I'll explain that a little bit. What we're thinking about here is the way in which we can create an environment whereby the profession itself is obviously clearly recognized as being a professional setting itself, but then also sort of to getting it to parity with some of the other public safety professions. So how do you create some of those similar environments that police, fire, emergency medical have, and what would be needed to do so? And we'll allow a few minutes for people to throw a few answers in as they're coming in now. Excellent points, excellent points. So leveraging existing work, I'm not sure who put that one in, but I might ask who put that one in to comment a little bit. I think that's a great comment, but I'd like to maybe bring that into the discussion a little bit more if we could. If you could unmute and make a comment. Anyone recognize their comment of leveraging existing work? I wish I had said it, frankly. Okay, we'll continue on. Defining the core competencies and comparable titles. Seeing some themes here. Core competencies, standards. We see the professional associations in there with the NINA Code of Ethics.
I love that training around equity and diversity. We're doing that in our center, and it has had a profound impact on how the telecommunicator interacts with the public. So bravo on that.
Let me ask you something that kind of sits behind the question a little bit. Is there something that everyone feels that is in place for the first responder environment in terms of training and recognition that is not in place, or you feel that's not necessarily recognized with regard to the 911 telecommunicator professionals? Let's talk about that a little bit as well. See mental health coming up again. Resiliency, great word. I'm not sure there's much more resiliency than there is in a 911 center, that's for sure. We'll let this go for a little bit longer too. I see there's some stuff in the chat. In addition, national level of licensing.
Yeah, John mentioned the national level of licensing. The training parameters speak to a minimum basic level of training that is needed, right? And that also speaks to a certification, which by definition speaks to a decertification process. So there should be an expectation from the public that no matter where they call 911 from, that they have a professional that has at least a basic level of training. So if that sparks anything for you, either put it in the chat or unmute and either push back or make a comment.
Anything further on that one, everyone? Okay, here we go. National level funding, certainly. Obviously, the career path is somewhat different in the telecommunicator field than it is with the first responder field with regard to pay and retirement equity. Those are always difficulties. So funding with regard to that is something that plays into it. Let me put one more sub-question into the conversation here with this as well. Certainly, there are differences in the internal governance structures of ECCs that exist within the context of a first responder department, such as the police department or fire department. There is certainly a difference in the independent quasi-governmental agencies, whereby they run as a separate entity of government, and then maybe many governments as well. Do you see, this is a question to everybody, do you see the training standards, possibilities for professionalism playing out differently between those two constructs? And feel free to weigh in on chat or Mentimeter. And then we'll switch over to our other question before I run us out of time.
George, are you asking if the training is different, or it'd be different if they're independent versus working under another organization such as police or fire?
Sure, indeed, Joseph. Thanks for responding. And even more than that, not necessarily just the training, but the way in which professionalism is seen and acted upon by the two different settings. We kind of want to dig into that as well to see if there's a path that's easier within any one construct.
Absolutely. I think legitimacy is a major issue when it comes to the identification of them being a first responder. They're a digital first responder. They are someone who has just as much impact on the outcomes of situations, but they're not viewed in some lights as being as important. So when you're looking at funding and you give police and fire funding for public safety, they are sometimes not funded as well as the dispatchers are not funded as well as they should be, or equitably. So I think that these studies would be great to use as a foundation for us going forward, to have directors, administrators, chiefs of the digital first responders that can allow us to be more legitimate, or be seen as equals in the organizations.
Great point. Thank you very much for providing that. Any other comments? I'm sorry?
Diversion of 911 funds comes to mind when Joseph mentioned that, and the work towards stopping that.
Indeed so. Oh, some good comments coming in as well. While they're coming in, we will have to switch over to our other questions so we don't run out of time as well. So as we do that, I'll read it off to you so you have the understanding. And we've already talked about this just a little bit so far. So what investments are needed in order to further professionalize the telecommunicator role, and by whom? And again, I see we've addressed some of this already, but let's focus on a little bit now. Certainly there could be federal support, obviously, for it. There could be additional state support. As we just mentioned also, just not rating funds could be helpful along the way as well. Reclassification, reclassification. I love the all caps. Okay, here we go. Online training. Here you go. Access to the same standards essentially nationwide is what that really means, I think. Council training support, crucial. One of the things that is, I've never sat in the seat or wore the headset in that fashion. One of the things that's always sort of sat in the back of my mind, since I always did see the end of a situation and the role I played in public safety, not seeing any follow through on the role of what happens within the context of any situation has to be a real tug on one's mental health. You start every situation, but you see almost zero of them. That has to be troubling. That's something that's always troubled me in terms of the people I've spoken with about these issues. Barbara, I see your comment there as well.
And that's true. I was on the governance breakout session, and there's so many different types of governance structures in 911. And we have to balance having some kind of consistency and predictability for funding and standards and everything else with the need for local control, because each community is not the same type of community. What plugs and plays in Texas will not probably work as well in the Seattle area. So flexibility, built-in flexibility to standards are important. And I'm not sure that's attainable really, but it has to be considered.
The recruiting and retainment side of it is certainly something to look at as well. Salaries, retirement benefits, all of those things certainly. Point at which one can retire as well. Obviously, that's shortened in the first responder field.
And data, absolutely.
Here, here.
Mhm. This is
It's
awesome.
really good to see all of the ways in which everyone's commenting with regard to training and that being available online. Certainly it's something we've all thought about, but I like that that's happening in our comments section here quite a bit, because I think that creates a level of parity across the country. Invest in people, here, here.
Mhm.
The career path within the construct of the telecommunication field and public safety, I think, is something that's important to study. We see increasing pay pop up in both the chat and in the Mentimeter as well. And that speaks back to recruiting and retention as well. Career development, John, I see your comment there, and if you're available to go off mute for a second, I'd like to ask you a follow-up on that, if you would. I think all the pieces we've been been talking about here are parts of career development. Are you thinking that there would be particular designated career paths within the construct of the public safety telecommunicator situation, similar to what you see in the police and fire departments? Is that kind of where you're going?
You know, George, I appreciate the opportunity to comment. You know, our first responders, many people start as a cadet, move into the ranks of a first responder, get certifications, that type of thing, and then move up the ranks. In the 911 world, the ability to develop and see 911 even as a career sometimes is limited, and sometimes a lot of times we'll see somebody goes into 911 only to take a career advancement in a first responder agency or organization. And as a result, you know, we lose that capability within 911, and sometimes you know, you don't see too many people retiring from 911.
Point well made. Thank you very much for that. That should indeed be a focus of this project moving forward. And to Laura's point as well, we are seeing more comments with regard to data. I think that's important. We'll need to make sure that this project gathers as much as we can on that front. One thing I'd like to follow up on a little bit more that's baked into our question is those final three words, and by whom. Can someone comment either in chat or in the Mentimeter, or feel free to unmute and speak to it as well. Who do you think should be investing in these professionalization components? The state, the agency itself, just the department, federal government, perhaps all of the above? One thing we want to definitely draw out is actually who can do this along the way. Takes a village, great comment, yeah.
And I'd like to include the telecommunicator themselves. By their actions, by their advocacy, by their professionalism. I think that that's built in, but I think we need to say it and recognize it, that the telecommunicator themselves has significant role in this goal.
You're here. With that, Laura, I think we might have to wrap up here, because I know we're literally only about 2 minutes out.
2 minutes out. I love that word, empower, Sarah. That's what I know you are doing that in your field of work, and I applaud you for that. So thank you all for being in this work group. If you would like to sign up to be part of further meetings, I encourage you to go to Transform 911 convening.org/workgroups and sign up. Again, it's the public safety. It's a long one. It's probably the longest title that you got.
By
I
far.
look it up each time. Public safety, telecommunicator, professionalism, and supports. Please be a part of this group. And thank you for this conversation today. And I'm sure any second we're going to get tacked back. But while we're still here, if anybody has any closing comments they want to share, please do. How about a song? Anybody have a song?
I like the meat and bones comment that Ashley just made. This is core, frankly. I think
Yeah,
a lot of
this-
things spin out from this topic, frankly.
Right, and the session we had to start off today, that panel, if you thought that panel was the entirety of Transform 911, let me assure you that there are lots of people involved. We just couldn't all be on that opening panel. That would have been a little bit overwhelming. I appreciate each person that was on that panel and that continues to be involved, because it does take all sorts of voices from all sorts of industry for 911 to be transformed in a positive way that we all want. I don't think anybody doesn't want 911 to be thought of as professional, as necessary, as celebrated, as recognized, as effective, as efficient, and honorable. So there are a lot of people towards this effort. And if we just had 911 professionals only involved in this, I think we would have a much, much longer road to go than having all of these voices. So thank you very much. And I look forward really to this topic and this future work groups.
Wholly concur. Well put, Laura. Thank you.